Hello everyone, it's the 29th day of December 2022. The countdown is on to the new year. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning. My name is Nifemi Oguntoye. Reactions continue to trail CBN's Naira redesign and cash withdrawal policy, and the latest is coming from the World Bank. The World Bank is warning that the time and the short transition period to the redesigned Naira notes will have a negative impact on economic activities and in particular, the poorest households. We are also getting reports from the Senate asking the CBN to delay the implementation of this policy till June next year. I'm joined on the program by Johnson Chukwu, CEO, Carry Asset Management Limited, and we'll also be joined subsequently by Professor Ken Ife, macroeconomic and public policy analyst. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program. Let me begin with you, Mr. Chukwu. The World Bank is saying, well, there isn't anything wrong, particularly with redesigning the currency, that perhaps it's overdue. We haven't done it in the past 2 decades. But the World Bank is concerned about the time, the duration, the time period, and it's saying that it may have a negative impact on the poorest households. How do you react to this?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to Nigerians. My take is that what the concerns expressed by the World Bank are genuine, but I think it might not be as high as they have presented it. Because I'm actually in the village as we speak, and I've related with people in the village. And I can tell you that one thing is that the small income earners, they don't have so much of liquidity, which is a concern that small and micro enterprises might find it difficult to be able to continue to do their businesses given the demonetization of the economy by changing the currency color, as well as limiting the amount of cash that can be withdrawn. Relating with people in the village here, you really hardly see people who have 50,000 naira or 100,000 naira in cash. And what will happen is clearly that towards the end of the month of January, people will no longer want to take the old note because they may not have banking relationship where they will go and lodge in the old notes. So what could lead is that you may see a slowdown, which is a concern, a slowdown in level of trade, in level of commerce, in level of business, commercial exchange, particularly with those who don't have bank accounts. But I don't think it's such that will overwhelm the positives associated with the demonetization of the economy.
The World Bank is talking about international experience, suggesting the implication for rapid demonetization. So like you've said, there might be nothing significantly wrong with this policy, but it's talking about how the rapid demonetization can impact on significant short-term costs with small-scale businesses and, the households in rural areas, potentially being particularly affected due to being liquidity constrained and heavily reliant on day-to-day cash transactions. Would you agree that there are still a large number of Nigerians who rely more on cash transaction than the online alternative?
Yes, I would agree that there's a reasonable number of Nigerians who rely entirely on cash transactions, particularly in the rural areas. But interestingly, if you have to go by the World Bank previous experiences, you will also agree with me that those experiences we had at periods when the level of digitization was not there, the level of financial technology was not there, the level of financial knowledge was not there. Today, we're dealing with some factor that could moderate the impact on those who do not have banking relationships. There are POS operators. Even in my village now, opposite my compound, there is a POS operator. So these people have provided financial services. 10 years ago, they were not there. 5 years ago, they were not there. So there are some cushioning impact as a result of advancement in technology. Again, the number of people who do not have bank account that are doing large ticket transactions have reduced significantly. So I think, granted, there is still a reasonable number of people who do not have banking relationships, who will trade deal only in cash, but their volume is quite low. Their their economic activity is quite low, and there are things that can be kind of absorbed or provided, or kind of their windows through which their needs can be addressed. Like we are not there a couple of years back. I talked about it. So, in as much as previous experience of the World Bank was that if you have a rapid demonetization of the economy, you could have adverse effects on the micro, small enterprises. But with the level of financial technology available today, with the level of digitalization available today, with the level of technological service available today, and given even the level of financial inclusion, I do not imagine that those impacts will be as severe in Nigeria as they used to be, or as they were in other jurisdictions where there was rapid demonetization.
How reliable is this financial technology you're talking about? I still had a failed transaction on Christmas Day. I was supposed to host a mini get-together, and I had asked, someone to bring food. The food arrived, and in an attempt to use the POS, the sum was deducted from my account, but the seller did not get the money. As we speak today, Mr. Chukwu, I'm yet to get a refund. That's perhaps an experience that many Nigerians will share. How reliable is this technology?
Well, what I would say is that one is that it's unfortunate you had that experience. Of course, those experiences are not uncommon. I've heard many instances like that. Even personally, this one, I tried to make a payment that didn't go through. But sometimes it fails and you do it again and it go through. But unfortunately, yours is that the account has been debited and the seller did not get credit. So money is out of your account, and the person who should get the payment has not gotten the payment. And I know there's actually a regulation around that, where the bank is supposed to resolve that within a particular number of hours. And I don't know if that is being implemented. But where I'm going to is that every system, there's no system that is fair proof. What we should strive to do is to reduce to the barest, very barest minimum, these instances of failed transactions. And where they do happen, they are immediately resolved within a matter of minutes. And once we have a mechanism for quick resolution of failed transactions, I don't think anybody will have major issues. If you are assured that within the next 30 days, 30 minutes, or the next hour, that the transaction will be reversed, you will be comfortable. So I think what we need to do is at this point that, given that this regulation has happened on us, we also need to push the regulators to ensure that failed transactions are immediately and expeditiously resolved. But there's no system in the world that is fair proof. So what they do elsewhere in the world is that when there's a failure, they identify the source of that failure and they build the mechanism and control mechanisms to ensure that it doesn't repeat itself, which is why you and I can fly comfortably today. Previously, it wasn't that flying was not that safe. But the aviation industry has continued to improve on failure points that they now have several backups. That's why a commercial aircraft will have four engines, well, what it needs to fly with one engine. So I think the fintech industry has to build backup systems that will ensure that when a failure happens, it's immediately remedied, so that even the service recipient may not even know there was a failure.
Let us explore another concern, which is the timing. At present, households and firms already face some sort of financial pressure, call it inflation, compounded by the issue of flood. There is fuel price hike. There are fuel queues now at filling stations. Many states are just recuperating from severe floods. There is the economic realities that is dawning everyone in the eye. How much of impact will this have, given the weight of financial pressure that most Nigerians are under?
Well, the key thing is that Nigerians are already going through a lot of pressure. So ordinarily, one would say that as much as possible, we should avoid, or the government or any regulator should avoid imposing additional burden on them or additional pressure on them. But I don't think the issue of change in the color or change in the design of the Naira is the kind of pressure that inflation is bringing on households, or the kind of pressure that fuel scarcity, increase in fuel prices is bringing on households, or exchange rate devaluation is bringing on households. It's an irritation. It's at most an irritation for households if they are unable to get the monies from the banks as they want it. But the problem we have with issue of inflation and depreciation of local currency and increase in fuel prices or scarcity of fuel is that it erodes the purchasing power of household income. But that is not what currency redesign does to the household, or nor limit to withdrawals of household income. So they are completely different things. But having said that, I did point out that it's when people are already going through pressures, it's not wise to burden them with even anything that will irritate them. But what we're dealing with is a necessary evil that we need to go through at this point. If you look at some of the motivations for the central bank decision to change the design of the currency, they include things like fighting corruption, fighting kidnapping by ransom payment to kidnappers, money laundering, and what have you. And I think one of the factors they have intentionally decided to downplay is that they are also, these pressures were also partly to discourage vote buying in the upcoming election. Because that's the only reason why you can explain, how you can explain the fact that the terminal date for the old currency is 31st of January, and then for minimum withdrawal, the effective date is 9th of January. So all those ahead of the presidential election coming up on 25th of February. So I think there's a huge dose of political motivation behind the current Naira redesign and maximum withdrawal limits.
Are you concerned about the scarcity of the new notes given the 31st January deadline?
Yes, I am, because I actually think by now we should have higher quantity of those notes. But I'm also conscious of the fact that the central bank said that a large proportion of currency in circulation was outside the banking system, which meant that just about 500 billion was what they required that was actually effectively in circulation. So maybe what the central bank wants to do is limit the amount of new currency in circulation to just about what was circulating before the change of currency. Their claim was that over 2.7 trillion was somewhere outside the banking system and stocked up by some people who had kept those funds for other motives. So if that's real, and if those figures are correct, then one can relate with why they don't want to flood the market with so much of the new currencies, so that not to defeat a primary objective of making it difficult for people to have access to that level of cash as to pay ransom. And hopefully that with that, the kidnappers will get out of business, and those who want to compromise the electoral system will find it difficult to have such cash to begin to buy voters during the election.
Do you envisage a rush to meet the deadline on the part of Nigerian people, and how much pressure also would that be putting the poor and vulnerable under?
Well, I did say to you that I'm actually in the village and I've related with the poor and vulnerable. And I can share with you one conversation I had with my wife yesterday. One of our fathers who is doing his retirement, and I said I was going to give him money. He said I should better get, because he's very old man in his late 80s, I should better get one of his son's accounts and transfer the money to him, because if I give him the old Naira note, he will not spend it, and it will just get wasted in his hand. She was sure that he won't spend it before the end of the deadline. And he's the kind of person that will be stacking all those monies and not even know that this particular designer was going out of circulation. So what am I saying in effect? That for the very rural area dwellers, they need to be sensitized on the need to swap their old currencies for new currencies. I don't think that sensitization has taken place. Even at this point, the central banks and the banking system and banking industry should, as much as possible, encourage POS terminal operators to swap old currencies to new currencies. So, which means that those new currencies should be made available to those agents, those who are providing agency banking services, so they can reach out to the nooks and crannies of the country and get people who do not even have detailed, full information about what's going on and who are keeping the old currency notes as part of their life savings. So bring them out and have them swapped. If that does not happen, then you could have a lot of old people in the rural areas who you would have completely ruined their savings because they did not know that this is going on, and they took no effort to swap their currencies, and those currencies that they have saved for decades will become useless in their hands.
The Senate just yesterday urged the central bank to, as a matter of urgency, extend the date of withdrawal of old currency from 31st January to June 31st, 2023. What do you make of this proposal?
You know, as I did say earlier, that one of the factors I think is propelling some of these policies is political issue. And clearly, if that's my assumption is correct, you can see two strands of political interest. The federal government or the president working in tandem with the central bank governor, trying to frustrate the politically exposed persons from having access to new currencies to compromise the electoral process. And the pushback by those politically exposed persons to extend the deadline and give them the latitude to do business as usual. So clearly, but unfortunately for the National Assembly, I don't see how their pushback can work, because obviously the central bank governor has the full support of the president. And again, currency design, currency issuance are all within the purview of the central bank. Currency management in general is the duty of the central bank. And because central bank is policy autonomous, they don't need directive or advice from this National Assembly to carry out their policies. Again, the pressure the National Assembly would have also brought to bear will no longer be there, because they've gone on recess and they'll be reconvening on 17th of January. And by that time, the effective date for the maximum cash withdrawal would have kicked in. And then the currency, the old currency circulation will just have about 14 days to go.
So a lot of money is spent in pre-election year. There's a school of thought that perhaps Nigeria needs it more at this time as a shock absorber for the many financial pressures that we talked about earlier. But talk to us about the economics of political spending. And don't you think that those monies that have been hidden away for so long will benefit many Nigerians at this time?
Yes, ordinarily, on paper, it looks that's what it should be. Depending on how that money gets into the hand of the average Nigerian. If it goes into the hand of through legitimate channels, then it will help reflate the economy to some extent, bring liquidity into the hands of an ordinary citizen, and improve on consumption, which will kind of, well, because once you have an improvement in consumption, you also need an improvement in production and improvement in employment. But as long as that is not spent as slush fund, where it's given to people who are not productive, who are not providing any service, and it's basically to compromise them or their values. If it is spent in the form of printing of posters, printing of flexes, hiring of artisans, making of uniforms, caps, slippers, preparing gift items to distribute, you are actually stimulating economic activities, because when you give out contract to make uniform for 1,000 people to attend your rally, you would have created employment for those who are doing the dyeing of the material, who are doing the asobi, who are sewing, and all the people who are in that value chain. And then you would have kind of contributed to reflating the economy. But if the money is spent in and coming to another woman and say, look, come and vote for Team B or Team X, and then get 1,000 naira or 200 naira, and then the woman won't see you again, and you promise the woman you're going to give her pipe and water, and by the time you buy her conscience because of her level of poverty, with 2,000 naira, you abandon her for the next 4 years. I think that is evil, and that should be discouraged. But if money is spent on political campaigns, political activities, that is positive for the economy and will help reflate the economy.
So the scarcity of the new notes may have been intentional on the part of the Apex Bank as a way of mopping up cash from the economy. But there are some who would also say that it could also be that the new notes are with the privileged few who may now have the opportunity to use the cash during election. If that is the case, what's the implication of that?
Well, if that's the case, then the central bank governor does not deserve his position. That means he has been compromised to the highest level. But I don't think the Godwin Emefiele I know will ever allow himself to be compromised to that level. Because if you now implement a system that is skewed and therefore compromise some people and then support others, it would be unethical. It would be unadvisable. But having said that, I think the reality is that I know the central bank has been going to banks, bank head office, visiting their vaults to be sure that they're not stacking up those funds, the new currencies, to hand over to some politically exposed persons that may have some leverage in those banks. That's what I'm sure they are doing, unless they put in a few that they want compromising. And I also hear that, I'm not confirmed that the banks are required to keep track serial numbers of those who have been given those funds. I mean, withdrawals of new currencies, that they record the serial numbers of the notes that are given out to particular persons who are making withdrawals, so as to track those funds and know how they are spent. So if they have gone to that extent, I will find it difficult to believe that they are stacking up the funds and giving to some privileged person. But like I said, if they do that, then they would have compromised everything they stand for.
It takes a lot of faith to be as optimistic as you are. Is there a track record to prove that the current system as it is cannot be manipulated?
Well, any system can be manipulated. It all depends on who is at the helm of affairs and what checks and balances the person has put in place to ensure that if the same is compromised to the barest minimum, and there are also feedback mechanisms that will highlight to those by maintaining that process that the same has some leakages. Like I said, I was a banker, and I know how well a big good bank can build checks and balances, control mechanisms to minimize issues of fraud or malfeasance. That does not mean that once in a while you may not have a failure in that control process. That's what gives me the confidence. Unless, like I said, the head of the banking system, which is the central bank governor, decides to throw everything to the dogs, to throw his reputation to the dogs. That's the only way he will intentionally want to hand over a large chunk of new currency notes to one or two individuals so that they can go and buy votes, while he's telling the whole world that nobody can withdraw more than 20,000 naira currently. So, like I said, at a certain stage in the human life, your reputation, everything you have. And I don't see anybody who have gotten to the rank of the central bank governor that want to compromise his reputation to that extent.
The World Bank has raised some other issues in its latest Nigeria Development Update of December 2022. Its World Bank Reports series produced twice a year that attempts to assess recent economic and social developments as well as prospects in Nigeria, and places these in a longer term and global context. We're going to take a short break, Mr. Chuku. When we return, we'll take a look at some of the issues raised in this report. We'll also open the phone lines for contribution. Don't forget you can use the hashtag ThisMorningTVC on all social media platforms. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Our attention again is turned this morning to CBN's policy on the redesigned Naira note and also its cash withdrawal policy. The latest reaction is coming from the World Bank saying that the instant withdrawal might have negative impact on vulnerable and poor people in Nigeria. Johnson Chukwu, the CEO Asset Management Limited, and he's joined us live for this conversation. Mr. Chukwu, I'd like us to take a look at the Nigeria Development Update of the World Bank for December 2022. The overview saying that Nigeria is in a challenging and deteriorating economic situation, and that our economic performance has weakened since the previous update in June. Now, this is not just a challenge limited to Nigeria. It is a wicked global economic environment. But how would you say that the Nigerian government is reacting, and how much shock absorber have we been able to create at this particular time?
Okay, let me first correct a wrong notion that has been created, that the problem that the world is going through today is affects every country, which is to say that it's a global problem. Yes, a number of countries are affected, but countries that are oil-producing countries are the ones smiling to the banks. And that's the group we should belong to. So our being part of those who are badly affected by the global economic conditions or situation is a self-inflicted injury, to the extent that countries like even Angola, that has overtaken us as the largest oil producer in the country, in the war in Africa, is smiling to the banks. Saudi Arabia is talking about building a new city, a modern city, or what they call a tech city, that they're going to create an artificial moon because they have made so much money from the windfall created by the war between Russia and Ukraine. Even Russia, that initiated the war, has created so much of economic buffer in terms of reserve. Virtually every country that's an oil exporting country is smiling to the banks. But that's not the situation with the country. We have, unfortunately, are suffering. I mean, we are suffering what oil importing countries are suffering, which shouldn't be the case. But now back to the issue of deterioration in our macroeconomic environment. Of course, that's very obvious. We know that the inflation rate has gradually moved to 21.47%, which means an average household, any product you bought, on average, your consumption budget last year, by November last year, has to increase by 21.47% if you have to consume the same quantity of goods and services. And if your income has not increased by 21.47% over the past 1 year, it simply means your standard of living has deteriorated to a reasonable extent. Then you are dealing with the issue of high food inflation, about 24%. You are dealing with the issue of currency depreciation. Now you are added the issues, like you mentioned, the issue of availability of petroleum products. Petrol today is selling in some parts of the country at 300 naira per liter. Diesel is selling about 900 naira per liter in some locations. And we don't have public power available from the public main. Nigerians have to generate their own power, generate their own water. For you to generate your own water, if you have a borehole at home, you have to use electricity generator to pump it. You have to find it difficult to buy fuel for your generator. So it's clear that our conditions have deteriorated. But if we are in the same position as other oil producing countries, we should actually be in this situation. We shouldn't be in this situation because, one, if we are exporting enough oil, then we would have had a strengthening of our currency, which would have made it difficult for the depreciation we've seen in our local currency to happen. And if that depreciation did not happen, the rate of inflation would have been moderated. The issue of food inflation is because we are not producing enough food. People in the farming belts have been displaced. It is not because the world is going through crisis that we have farmer displaced in Zamfara State, in Sokoto State, in Katsina State. It's because we have not managed our security well. So our problem, in as much as there are some components of international macroeconomic effect on us, but it's largely endogenous.
Mm. So you have mentioned that we should have been an exception being an oil-producing nation, and that our external fiscal pressures shouldn't have continued to grow despite elevated global oil prices. But the World Bank has now identified two reasons why Nigeria isn't benefiting from high global oil prices: lower oil production and the cost of petrol subsidy. Why did these two items remain a thing over the years in Nigeria?
Well, because of the choices we made as a people. Like I said, in my last comment, I closed with they are all endogenous. Most of them are endogenous factors. The two factors you mentioned, low oil production. There is no angel or spirit that is constraining us from producing enough crude. It is because we have not been able to win the hearts of those who live in the oil-bearing communities, because we have continued over decades to exploit them as if they are not human beings. And therefore, they have decided to respond or react in kind to the policies that the government has visited on them. Ideally, if you go to a place like Texas, which is the oil capital of the U.S., even the most rural areas is developed because the monies that were generated from oil has the tax clawback of that is reflective in the communities. Go to Abu Dhabi. It's basically from oil. But go to a village in Bayelsa or even some towns, villages in rivers or delta, and then you see, you can even feel and touch poverty. So because we took those decisions to basically emasculate those who live in oil-bearing as localities, and they now decided to fight back, and we've not been able to address that, those their issues. We've set up NDDC, but go and show me the drastic impact NDDC has had on the communities they're supposed to attend to, irrespective of the fact that so much money has gone through their system. So that's one factor. The second factor, which you mentioned, you said the issue of we're not producing enough oil.
And the issue of cost of petrol subsidy.
Yes, I'm coming. So the issue of producing enough oil is basically our internal problem. The issue of petroleum subsidy, that I remember in 2012 or thereabout, the then president of President Goodluck Jonathan removed the subsidy. And then it was all hell was let loose. And then people went to the street and shut down the economy and shut down the country and said, look, this is the only thing we're getting from the country as citizens. But I asked them, our standard of living, is it better than the person who lives in Rwanda or the person who lives in Egypt? These are countries not producing any liter of crude. Are we living better than those who live in Indonesia or those who live in Brazil or those who live, even if you come back to even African countries, even those who live in Kenya, are we better than them or those who live in South Africa that we say we want to enjoy the benefit of petroleum subsidy? The fact is that today, between you and I, fuel is allocated to oil market at 148 naira per liter. But then at the pump head, it is sold for close to 300 naira per liter outside Lagos and Abuja. So who is fooling who? It's a choice we've taken. And this year, they're borrowing about 6.6 trillion naira if the subsidy has to run through the year. 3.6 or 3.3 trillion naira for the first 6 months of the year. So what is the reason why we can't take it? If it has become a burden to us and it's costing us so much of economic development, why can't we take it out today? We're already paying almost commercial rate for the fuel.
When you say we are where we are because of the choices we make, are these choices government can make independent of the people? You just made reference to 2012. I also overheard one of the presidential candidates saying that subsidy will be removed whether Nigerians like it or not. Can the government remove subsidy without some level of support from the popularity or majority of the people?
Well, let me say something about leadership. Leadership define values, leadership define culture. Leadership is all about charting a direction and convincing your people to follow that direction with you. That's what leadership is all about. You have a clear vision of where you want to take the people to. You say that vision to them, and you lead them from the front and lead them to the destination that you want them to get to. That's what leadership is all about. So when we talk of will Nigerians accept it or Nigerians not accept it, has leadership come to Nigerians and explained to them, this is why we have to take out the subsidy? Have we showed them, have we worked our talk in such a way that Nigerians will clearly appreciate that the leadership means well for them? Are we having leaders who are living on still life as to make Nigeria, convince Nigerians they have to make sacrifices so that you're not asking them to make sacrifices where you're living in opulence? So those are what is missing. There is a trust deficit because the leadership is not living the life that they want the citizens to also subject themselves to. If we have leaders who walk their talk, then followers will follow a leader who walks his or her talk.
So the worldwide projection is not also looking good for Nigeria in the coming year. It's had to review its growth projection downwards based on the economic realities in the outgoing year. But will you say that our spending plan is anything uniquely different from what we've had in the previous years? Just yesterday, the Senate passed some, I think, 21.8 trillion naira budget for the new year. But when you look at it, the recurrent expenditure is still significantly higher than that of the capital expenditure at 8.3 trillion to 5.9 trillion. And we're still spending some 6.5 trillion naira to service debt.
The current budget we have today, the current budget structure we have today was built up over time. And it's what you may call an obtuse fraction, or what the obtuse budget, if there's anything called that. Because we have consistently grown the recurrent expenditure. We've grown the recurrent expenditure. By the time you add the recurrent expenditure to debt service, you're already above 12 trillion. You're already above the total revenue that you generate from the projected revenue that the government is planning to end this year. So, but the reality is that until we begin to run government as business, then we are going to have a fiscal framework that is not sustainable. Our current fiscal framework is clearly not sustainable because there's no way that the amount you spend to maintain the government and amount you pay as interest will be more than the total amount you earn as revenue. Then every kobo that will be spent on capital expenditure, if any of them will be spent, will be borrowed. So we need to completely ask ourselves, is how sustainable? For how long are we going to be borrowing to spend on government? So that's the first thing. And like I said, over time, we gradually kept on building this up to structure, and it become completely unmanageable.
So with our economic output growth slowing down and our growth projection being lowered, I'd like us to tie this back to our initial conversation. How is the CBN policy structured and designed in such a way to help our current economic realities?
Well, the central bank has a lot of developmental initiatives. Beyond the issue of policy management, which we have discussed here, the central bank also has intervention funds that have set aside for some sectors of the economy. You have the Anchor Borrowers Program, which is targeted at the agricultural sector. You have some funds that have been developed through the Bank of Industries for small and medium-scale enterprises and for those industrial sectors. Those are the ways that central bank, using the development finance arm, to try to intervene in the economy as to support economic growth. So his job is not just about policy management. He also has a duty to stimulate the economy. If you remember, at the height of COVID, central bank provided a lot of funding, into trillions of naira for the healthcare sector. I think 100 billion for the healthcare sector. I think 1 trillion naira or so for the industrial sector. So all those things were intervention funds, and they were offered to the public at about 5% interest rate. So they were intended to support the real sector of the economy. So the central bank has been doing its own, to a reasonable extent, playing its own role to support the economy. Like I said, policy management is just one of the multiple functions of the central bank.
If you look at all of these reactions that we're following this morning, it would seem that the lawmakers are on the side of the World Bank as to asking CBN to tread with caution and delay the implementation of its policy as it relates to withdrawal of cash and Naira redesign. Do we have a track record as to saying, no, we're not following the World Bank in this regard? Perhaps the previous advice they have given to us haven't really worked for us.
Well, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't take it from that perspective, of course. But if we have to dwell on that for academic reasons, when the World Bank introduced, IMF and World Bank introduced a structural adjustment program to third world countries, the impact of that program became more damaging in several economies. At some point, after a couple of years, the IMF World Bank came back to apologize to the countries that we are badly who adopted the structural adjustment program, and it worsened their economy. So that's to say that, because of course, nobody has monopoly of knowledge. And these policies, some of them have not been tested and some of them are jurisdiction specific. in the sense that it may work in one particular jurisdiction, not work perfectly in another jurisdiction because of structural differences. But in terms of currency design change, if you cast your mind back to, I think it was 1983, when the then Major General Muhammadu Buhari and then Brigadier General Tunde Diabo were at the helm of affairs, the currency change took place in a matter of days. I mean, the central bank, they shut down the borders and it commanded a currency change. But the country did not, the country did not collapse. And I'm just talking about in terms of the timeline. And at that time, there was no actually the level of technology we have today that payments can actually be made virtually. The currency was purely cash-based. So, like I said earlier, clearly there were some drawbacks. There are some components of the economy that made participants in the economy that were adversely affected by this policy. But overall, if we stick with it and see it through, the economy will be better off for it.
So the CBN has made some policy suggestions that can help the country rise to its potential. And one of it would be restoring macroeconomic stability, increasing oil and non-oil revenues. It's a long list here. It also includes reducing inflation through a sequenced and coordinated mix of trade, monetary and fiscal policy, and also boosting private sector development and competitiveness. When you marry all of this together, it do reflect some of the government policies and initiatives of the federal government, don't they?
Yes, on paper, the government has mounted some of these policies. I mean, what the World Bank has recommended to us is not new. There are things we're all familiar with and we all know we need to do. The key thing is that whether the government has seriously followed those policies or has actually pursued those lines of economic thoughts. You did mention here that the World Bank said the two greatest challenge we have is the issue of crude oil production and the issue of subsidy. I mean, if you cast your mind back, this present government said they're going to take out the subsidy at the end of last year. This is 12 months shy of the time they said they would take it off. And then at some point, they said they're going to take it off by the middle of this year. And all of a sudden, when we got to the middle of this year, they now moved it to middle of next year when the new government will already be in power. The new government can as well come in and say, we're not going to buy this bullet at this point, and they shift it again. And then, but at the end of the day, we are the worse off for it. So it's all about having the political will to do the right things, even if it's going to bring temporary pain. Like the example I always give is that somebody who had a fracture. You had a choice. You have a choice to be given pain relief tablets to a person who had a fracture, so as to minimize the pain. But the other option is to go through an operation where you have to get an orthopedic doctor to come and reset the bones. The person will go through a one-time pain, very excruciating pain, irrespective of the level of pain relief they may give to the person. But that will resolve the problem once and for all. We need to go through that pain, what is similar to what we call the birth pain. We need to rebirth the economy, go through the difficulties we need to face, and build an economy that will serve the purpose of majority of Nigerians.
So it's not going to be, you know, an easy fix solution like many politicians have postulated. But how do you think that Nigerians can identify the body language of individuals who have the capacity to make these difficult decisions?
Well, the question we should ask all those who are asking us to employ them as our chief executive, the chief executive of this country, is that where are they coming from? What's their pedigree? They show us their tombstones. What have they done in the past? What's the lifestyle they live? How did they make their money, if they claim to have money? And let's see the track record of what they have achieved in their life. So those questions, we need to interrogate their personality, their value systems, their orientation to work, their economic orientations. We need to challenge them, including on their personal lifestyle, so that when they are elected, they will be the poster boy or poster girl for the country. The leadership is all about leading from the front. A leader is a role model, and the leader epitomizes the values of the society. So if we get it right with leadership, a lot of things will fall into line.
It's been decades of wrong choices and poor decisions, economically, and many would say it will take a while to fix these challenges. A big thank you, Johnson Chuku, CEO, Carry Asset Management Limited. Thank you for talking to us on the program this morning.
My pleasure.
All right, that's our show. Thanks for being a part of it. The conversation continues online with the hashtag ThisMorningTVC. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thank you for joining us.